All right, Virginia Tech fans, I hope you soaked up and savored the prolific Virginia Tech passing game over the final two-thirds of the 2016 season. You had the most prolific wide receiver in the history of the school in Isaiah Ford, and he had a quarterback who had the arm, the mobility, and the read ability to get the ball to him on a regular occasion. You lost Bucky Hodges as well. Those guys are off to the NFL. You lose Gerard Evans as well. Hopefully, Justin Fuente's expertise in the passing game will pay off, and Virginia Tech will be able to sustain the strides that they made in developing a passing attack in 2016. We bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to sort through a huge bevy of wide receivers as we were running them through before we hit the record button. But before we do that, we got to look back because we're talking about two historic players in the history of the program, Mike, and Isaiah Ford, who caught 210 passes and 24 touchdowns, and Bucky Hodges, just a very unique player, listed as a tight end, but a guy that was just a mismatch and a nightmare for a number of safeties and linebackers in the ACC.
Yeah, Isaiah Ford, everything you just mentioned there, all school records, the most prolific receiver in Virginia Tech history. There are a lot of very good receivers that have played at Virginia Tech over the years. Isaiah Ford is every bit as good as those receivers. Plus, he's playing in a pass-happy offense. Plus, he's playing in an era where passing game in the college game is so prevalent, so much more prevalent than it has been, even into the early 2000s where it was still more of an option run attack. The spread passing offense obviously benefited him, but he's such a great receiver, and I think he'll make an impact at the next level. As a first or second round draft pick, wherever he ends up falling. Bucky Hodges, same way. A lot of people will remember he was a redshirt freshman for Virginia Tech when they upset Ohio State in the Horseshoe, and he had a huge game. That was kind of his coming out party, and he was very good the rest of that freshman season that he had for the Hokies. Took a step back a little bit as a sophomore. A lot of that was not completely his fault, mostly due to some quarterback woes. Of course, Michael Brewer got injured in that following season's opener against Ohio State. They went with Brendan Motley at quarterback. Motley was not the passer that Michael Brewer was, but, Bucky Hodges was still able to put up decent stats in his sophomore year, but took a step back certainly from his redshirt freshman campaign. And then this past year as a junior was kind of somewhere in the middle. When Gerard Evans was looking his way, Bucky Hodges was every bit as good as he's ever been. And his stats are better than they have ever been as well. And a lot of that is due to the offense. But I think his best year was as a redshirt freshman, kind of a little bit of a dip as a sophomore, and then really rejuvenated himself as a junior in this offense with Justin Fuente and Gerard Evans at quarterback, becoming one of the more prolific passers in one single season in school history this past year. So two guys that are really hard to replace in Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges when you got a guy that's, 6'2" and making plays all over the field across the middle and running fade routes. And then you got Bucky Hodges, who's an absolute matchup nightmare. And the same thing will be the case at the next level in the NFL. Not a lot of guys are 6'7", can run a 4.6 40 and can make all the athletic plays that he makes at 245 pounds. So Bucky Hodges and Isaiah Ford will surely be missed for the Hokies heading into next season.
Yeah, if you watch any kind of college football, you know who Isaiah Ford is. You probably should know who Bucky Hodges is as well. Considering how great Ford was, Bucky Hodges scored only 2 less touchdowns in his career at Virginia Tech at 133 receptions. So you lose 2 of the prolific receivers in the history of the school, and you figure the cupboard has to be completely bare, but there is one complete stud go-to guy left. Cam Phillips caught 76 balls for almost 1,000 yards last year, and this may be his complete time to shine.
Yeah, we're talking about a guy who's kind of lived in the shadow of the two guys we just mentioned, Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges. Cam Phillips has been a starter all 4 years at Virginia Tech, or at least he will be heading into next year in his 4th year on campus. 165 receptions for 2,000 yards and 10 touchdowns in his career with the Hokies. He, much like Bucky Hodges, had a little bit of dip in production from a touchdown perspective as a sophomore, but as a junior went right back up to 5 touchdowns, a career high, 983 yards receiving, career high, and reception total of 76 was a career high as well. And the number of receptions and yards, Cam Phillips has had a steady progression over his career, had 40 catches for nearly 500 yards as a freshman, 49 catches for 582 yards as a sophomore, and then 983 yards on 76 catches last year. Made a ton of plays in the final 4 or 5 games of the season. A guy that really started to come into his own here as, the power kind of transitioned, so to speak, from Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges to Cam Phillips, who will take on a much larger role for the Hokies heading into this season, this coming season. A couple other guys that have made an impact for Virginia Tech. You look at Chris Cunningham. He's a guy I love to talk about because he was kind of the hybrid tight end that was sitting behind Bucky Hodges. But when he got in the game, he made an impact. 6 catches on the season, 4 of them for touchdowns. The guy is a wiry athlete, 6'2", 230 pounds. He can make some plays in the passing game, has proven to have reliable hands, especially in the red zone, where he became an increased threat as the season went along, and a guy that Justin Fuente definitely wasn't afraid to throw out there, even if he hadn't been playing a ton. He'd throw him out there in the red zone situations, and Chris Cunningham would make a game-changing play. And then one other guy who makes game-changing plays, who's also recently a scholarship player for the Virginia Tech Hokies, is CJ Carroll, who's going to be a junior. Carroll came out of a very good high school program, Our Lady of Good Counsel in Olney, Maryland, the same school that produced Kendall Fuller at Virginia Tech. They were high school teammates. CJ Carroll, his entire career, has kind of just had his role on special teams until this past season, carved out more of a role for himself as a slot receiver, a guy that came across the middle, played more in the Danny Cole role, if you'll remember Danny Cole, and then Willie Byrne more recently. A guy here in CJ Carroll who makes all the right plays, makes very reliable catches. His biggest catch of the year was on a third quarter scoring drive to open up the second half for the Hokies on the road at Notre Dame. He had a 65-yard catch, caught a short pass over the middle, made a couple guys miss, and went running wild through the secondary. Ended up setting up the Hokies in the red zone for a touchdown that ended up being decisive as the Hokies were making their comeback against Notre Dame back in November. So CJ Carroll, really reliable player, recently put on scholarship, should have a very similar role moving forward given his size at 5'9". He'll be a slot receiver for the Hokies and hopefully can continue to make an increased impact on the offense as the season goes along.
So, Mike, as Cam is the definite number 1 and Carroll most likely the number 2, you obviously need other guys to supplement them. So not even digging into the signing class that was inked a couple weeks ago, there's about 3 or 4 guys led probably by Divine Diablo that they need 1 or 2 more guys to step up and become factors in the passing game.
They do for sure. And Divine Diablo is going to be a sophomore this year, and the Hokies are hoping at 6'3", 208 pounds. He can come in and make an immediate impact. A guy can become a red zone threat given his size. Phil Patterson is another guy to watch. He's going to be a redshirt freshman, 6'2", 180. Both of these guys I just mentioned were from the class of 2016. And 2 guys the Hokies were really hoping will make an impact here in the coming seasons on the offensive side of the football. Obviously, due to the depth that the Hokies had at receiver, they simply just didn't see the field all that much. But I think Divine Diablo and Phil Patterson, if you had to put 2 guys in the receiving category that could fit in right away, I think those are 2 guys to watch for. They haven't received a ton of playing time here in their time at Virginia Tech thus far. One other guy I want to mention, he's a junior this coming season, Jalen Bradshaw, 6'1", 202, hasn't carved out a role for himself yet, mostly due to what I just mentioned, the depth at the receiver position. But I think that Jalen Bradshaw is a guy who's finally starting to come into his own by all indications. I think that he can make an impact on the offense as well. And like you mentioned, if the Hokies even have 2 of these guys hit, in addition to Cam Phillips, Chris Cunningham, and CJ Carroll, the offense should run seamlessly and hopefully have a very good core group of upperclassmen to kind of lead the charge here for the Hokies. Of course, upperclassmen is a relative term here because they're going to be a young receiving group, but they'll be upperclassmen relative to these true freshmen that are coming in, and there are a lot of those receivers as well, Mark.
Justin Fuente also targeted wide receiver in this latest recruiting class, grabbing 3 guys rated in the top 100 at the wide receiver position. We may not see them this fall, but when you talk about Khalil Pimpleton, Hezekiah Grimsley, Sean Savoy, again, all rated in the 90s, basically at wide receiver, guys that past 2017 are going to be, again, a collection that you would like to see 2 out of the 3 hit as being impact players going forward.
Yeah, and Khalil Pimbleton, 5'8", 153, likely a redshirt candidate, but a guy who I believe once CJ Carroll graduates in a couple seasons will be a guy who you can seamlessly throw into the role there as a slot receiver for the Hokies. Like you mentioned, Hezekiah Grimsley, Sean Savoy, two types of receivers that are very similar, standing around 6 feet tall, shade over 200 pounds, guys who should be impact players for the Hokies down the line, or at least that's what the coaching staff's hoping for. They can fill more of a slot role, but even at 6 feet tall, they can play a little bit on the outside as well. At least that's what the hope is. You look at Cam Phillips at 6 feet tall. He's played both in the slot and on the outside in his career. Isaiah Ford was 6'1.5", and he made carved out quite the role for himself as a 6'1" receiver on the outside for the Hokies. So those are some guys are hoping to make an impact. And then one of my favorite receivers in the class out of North Carolina is 6'2" receiver Caleb Farley. He was actually came in as an athlete, was a quarterback in high school, but was extremely athletic, ran a spread option system there in high school, made a bunch of plays on his feet, made guys miss. And then what we ended up seeing in recruiting camps on film, is they played a little bit more receiver because he figured that's probably what his role was going to be moving into college. And he showed some seamless skills, much like Bucky Hodges did when Bucky Hodges made the move from quarterback to receiver from high school to college as well. So Caleb Farley is one of my favorite players in this class. Don't know if he'll have a role this coming season, but I think he's definitely a guy to watch for moving forward. He's a really intriguing guy who can definitely make a difference. And then one guy quickly at tight end who's a really interesting story is Dalton Keene, 6'4", 225, true freshman. He's from Littleton, Colorado. His father was collegiate teammates at Virginia Tech with both Charlie Wiles, who's the offensive line coach, and former head coach and Virginia Tech legend Frank Beamer. A little bit of a pipeline there. Went out to Colorado, got a 6'4" tight end who's extremely talented, a guy who's ranked relatively high on 24/7 Sports. So Dalton Keene's a guy to watch for as well. And then if you want one other guy who at tight end who might not necessarily fit into a pass catching role, but will be more of a blocking back, maybe an H-back role, or could even transition into an offensive tackle role down the line for the Hokies, is true freshman Lecitus Smith. Already looks the part, big 6'2" body, a guy who the Hokies are high on just given his skills that he's shown as a blocker on film. Imagine sending that guy in motion, having him crack a linebacker in a running play. I think that's the perfect role for him. And then if that doesn't work out, maybe move him to tight end. He's already talked about coming into the signing class with Virginia Tech that, he was really excited about blocking, which you never hear out of these high school recruits that play tight end or receiver. They're exciting about blocking, but Lecitus Smith is a guy who obviously in high school was very good at that craft and hopes he can continue that moving forward. And I think he can have quite the role for himself in this offense if he continues blocking in college like he did in high school. Perhaps take on more of an H-back role for the Hokies, a position that they really lacked last year in the first year in the system.
As you sized up for us, Mike, Dalton Keene and Lecitus Smith, two very different type tight ends, but in regards to their rankings coming out of high school, very similar in regards to the talent evaluation. Lecitus Smith out of Georgia, the 43rd rated tight end according to 247 Sports. Dalton Keene at number 37th in the nation. So Virginia Tech fans, put away the Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges jerseys and cherish them a little bit later. Get used to a whole new slew of wide receivers, and hopefully a number of these guys can complement the talents of Cam Phillips and continue what has been started under Justin Fuente, and that's a very serious passing attack with the Hokies. Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC breaking down a bevy of wide receivers and tight ends at Virginia Tech right here on Mark Rogers TV. Mike, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.